The first thing I noticed was that my wife never came home from that house looking sad. She always looked relieved. That was what bothered me most. For almost 8 months, every Sunday at exactly 2 p.m., my wife, Claire, would put on the same beige coat, grab her purse, kiss me on the cheek, and say, "I'll be back before dinner." She never told me where she was going. And I never asked. Until one Sunday, I followed her. What I saw when she walked through that front door made me question whether I had ever truly known the woman I married. Claire and I had been married for 11 years. We weren't one of those couples who posted pictures every week about how perfect our marriage was. We were ordinary. We argued about groceries. We forgot anniversaries. We watched the same shows at night and complained about each other's choice of restaurants. But we loved each other. At least, I thought we did. We lived in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes outside the city. Claire worked as a dental office manager, and I managed a small construction company with my brother. Our life was comfortable. Not exciting, but comfortable. We had a daughter, Emma, who was 17 and preparing for college. And, for the most part, we were happy. Then Claire started disappearing every Sunday. At first, I didn't think much of it. She told me she had started helping someone. Helping who? I asked casually one morning. She was pouring coffee into her travel mug. Just someone who needs it. She smiled. It's nothing dramatic. I laughed. You're being mysterious. I'll tell you eventually. That answer should have bothered me. Instead, I kissed her goodbye. A few Sundays passed. Then a month. Then 2. And the routine never changed. 2 p.m. Beige coat. Black handbag. Same excuse. I'll be back before dinner. Sometimes she returned at 5 o'clock. Sometimes closer to 6:30. And every time, she acted as if nothing unusual had happened. I'd ask, "Everything okay?" She'd say, "Everything's fine." I'd ask, "Did you have a good afternoon?" She'd smile. "Yeah." Then she'd change the subject. I told myself I trusted her. And I did. Or at least, I thought I did. But trust becomes complicated when someone keeps giving you reasons to wonder. One Sunday, I noticed something. Claire had bought a small cake. Not the kind you bring home for your family. It was a little chocolate cake from the bakery downtown. I watched her put it carefully into a cardboard box. "Whose birthday is it?" She froze. Then she smiled. "No one's." I looked at the cake. "It has candles." She laughed nervously. "Maybe I just wanted to bring someone something nice." "Who?" She closed the box. "Please don't ask." That was the first time she had ever said those words to me. Please don't ask. Not I don't want to talk about it. Not it's private. Please don't ask. I remember standing there in the kitchen after she left, staring at the empty doorway. For the first time, I wondered if there was another man. I hated myself for thinking it. Claire wasn't the cheating type. At least, I had never believed she was. But suddenly, everything started looking suspicious. The late Sunday afternoons. The phone she kept face down. The way she sometimes disappeared into another room to take a call. The unexplained cash withdrawals. Even the fact that she had become more affectionate lately started bothering me. You know how the mind works. Once you become suspicious, ordinary things start looking like evidence. I didn't confront her. Instead, I started watching. Not in a dramatic way. I didn't search her phone. I didn't check her messages. I simply paid attention. And eventually, I noticed something else. Every Sunday evening, Claire washed her hands almost immediately after coming home. Then she'd change clothes. I asked her about it once. You went somewhere dirty? She smiled. Something like that. What does that mean? Nothing. Then she kissed me. That kiss didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. Because it felt like she was trying to reassure me without telling me anything. One Sunday, I couldn't take it anymore. I told myself I wasn't going to follow her. I genuinely meant it. Claire left at 2:03. I watched her car disappear down the street. Then I stood in the kitchen for about 10 minutes. I made coffee. I opened my laptop. I checked emails. I tried to watch television. But I couldn't concentrate. At 2:21, I grabbed my keys. I don't know what finally made me do it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe fear. Maybe some part of me was already preparing for the worst. I got into my car and followed her. I kept several cars between us. Claire drove across town, past the shopping center, past the old library, and into a neighborhood I'd never had a reason to visit. Then she turned onto a narrow street lined with old maple trees. She pulled up in front of a small gray house. I slowed down. She got out. Looked around. Then walked to the front door. An elderly woman opened it. Claire smiled. The woman hugged her. I sat in my car across the street, completely confused. An elderly woman? Not a secret boyfriend. Not an affair. Not what I had imagined. But then I noticed something. The woman wasn't alone. There was a young man sitting near the living room window. He looked about 20. And when he saw Claire, his face lit up. Claire walked inside. The door closed. I sat there for nearly an hour. I wanted to leave. But something told me not to. Then, through the window, I saw Claire kneel beside the young man. She put her hand on his shoulder. And he hugged her. Not romantically. It was the kind of hug a child gives his mother. I felt something cold move through my stomach. Who was he? I waited another 20 minutes. Eventually, Claire came outside. She was carrying a grocery bag. The elderly woman followed her to the porch. They hugged. Claire got into her car. I waited until she drove away. Then I looked at the house. I should have left. Instead, I walked to the front door. I knocked. The elderly woman opened it. She looked surprised. Yes? I suddenly felt ridiculous. I'm sorry, I said. I think my wife was just here. The woman's expression changed. She looked behind me. Then back at me. You're Claire's husband? Yes. She stared at me for several seconds. Then quietly said, You don't know, do you? My heart dropped. Know what? She opened the door wider. Please come inside. Her name was Margaret. She sat me down at the kitchen table. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said something I will never forget. Claire didn't want you to find out this way. My mouth went dry. Who is that young man? Margaret looked toward the living room. His name is Daniel. Okay. She folded her hands. Daniel is my grandson. I nodded. That still didn't explain anything. Then she said, Claire is his mother. I honestly thought I had misheard her. What? Claire is Daniel's biological mother. I stared at her. No. Margaret didn't respond. No, I repeated. Claire can't have a son that age. She had him when she was 19. I couldn't speak. Margaret continued. She gave him up for adoption. Everything suddenly became strangely quiet. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked on the wall. And somewhere in the other room, I heard Daniel laughing at something on television. I finally whispered. Why didn't she ever tell me? Margaret looked down. Because she was ashamed. Claire had been 19. She had gotten pregnant while she was in college. The father had left almost immediately. Claire's parents had been deeply religious and extremely strict. They told her she had ruined her life. According to Margaret, Claire wanted to keep the baby. But she couldn't. She had no money, no support, no stable home. And her parents refused to let her raise him. So Daniel was placed for adoption. Claire signed the papers. Then she disappeared from his life. Or at least, that was what everyone believed. But when Daniel was 16, he found out he had been adopted. When he turned 18, he started searching for his biological family. Eventually, he found Claire. And instead of telling me, she started visiting him. Every Sunday. For almost 8 months. I sat there staring at Margaret. Why wouldn't she tell me? Margaret sighed. Because she was afraid you'd look at her differently. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I didn't know what else to do. She lied to me for almost a year. She was afraid. She could have told me. I know. And she brought him into our lives without telling me. Margaret looked at me. She wasn't trying to replace you. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Because somewhere inside me, that was exactly what I had been afraid of. I drove home before Claire returned. I didn't tell her I'd followed her. I needed time. That evening, we ate dinner like normal. Emma talked about a college application. Claire asked me how work had gone. I answered. Then she asked, "Are you okay?" I looked at her. For the first time in 11 years, I saw how tired she looked. Not guilty. Not deceptive. Just exhausted. I said, "Yeah." She smiled. And I almost told her everything. But I didn't. The following Sunday, Claire left again. This time, I didn't follow. Instead, I waited. She returned around 6 o'clock. She walked through the front door carrying the same grocery bag. Then she stopped. She looked at me. "What's wrong?" I said. "Tell me about Daniel." She dropped the bag. One of the containers inside rolled across the floor. Claire's face went completely white. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she sat down. "Where did you hear that name?" "I followed you." She closed her eyes. I expected anger. Instead, she started crying. Not loudly. Just tears running down her face. "I was going to tell you." "When?" "I don't know." 8 months, Claire." "I know." "You lied to me." "I know." "You made me think you were having an affair." "I know." I was angry. But underneath the anger was something else. Hurt. Deep, ugly hurt. "You should have trusted me enough to tell me." She looked at me. I was terrified. Of me? Yes. That answer broke something in me. Why? She wiped her eyes. Because I spent my entire life believing that if people knew about Daniel, they'd see me as a different person. I didn't know what to say. She continued. "I thought you'd wonder what kind of woman gives up her own child. You were 19. I know. You were a kid." She shook her head. "I didn't feel like one." Then she told me everything. Daniel had contacted her 3 years earlier. At first, they exchanged emails. Then phone calls. Eventually, they met. Claire was terrified the first time. She expected him to hate her. Instead, he asked her one question. "Why didn't you keep me?" Claire told him the truth. She didn't have the courage to tell him everything at once. But over time, they started building a relationship. She visited him every Sunday. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they went for walks. sometimes they did nothing. The elderly woman I'd met, Margaret, was Daniel's grandmother on his adoptive mother's side. His adoptive parents had divorced years earlier, and Daniel had been struggling emotionally. Claire became part of his support system. She wasn't trying to become his mother. She simply wanted to be there. And every Sunday, she brought groceries because Daniel was struggling financially. The cake? It had been his birthday. The cash withdrawals? She'd been helping him pay for a certification course. The phone calls? Daniel. And the reason she always changed clothes? She had been helping him with renovations around Margaret's house. Suddenly, every suspicious detail had an explanation. But that didn't erase what she had done. I asked Claire why she hadn't introduced us. She looked at the floor. Because I didn't know what I wanted him to be in our lives. That was honest. And painful. I told her I needed time. She understood. For the next few weeks, things were awkward. We weren't fighting. But we weren't normal either. I needed to process the fact that my wife had a 20-year-old son I'd never known existed. Eventually, Claire asked, "Would you meet him?" I said yes. But I was nervous. More nervous than I wanted to admit. We met at a small coffee shop on a rainy Saturday. Daniel arrived first. When he stood up, I noticed immediately how much he looked like Claire. Same eyes. Same smile. Same habit of rubbing his thumb against his palm when he was nervous. He shook my hand. Hi. Hi. We sat down. For the first few minutes, conversation was painfully awkward. Then Daniel said, "I know this is weird." I laughed. A little. He smiled. Then he looked at me. "I didn't want to cause problems for you and Mom." That word caught me. Mom. Claire had told me he rarely called her that. I said, "You didn't." He looked relieved. Then he said, "She talks about you a lot." I looked at Claire. She smiled. And for the first time in months, I felt some of the tension leave my chest. Things didn't become perfect overnight. Real life doesn't work that way. There were uncomfortable conversations. There were questions Claire couldn't answer. There were moments when I felt jealous of a relationship that had existed before I even knew it existed. But slowly, something changed. Daniel started coming over for dinner. Emma met him. At first, she was stunned. Then fascinated. She called him her secret older brother. He loved the nickname. Eventually, Sunday stopped being Claire's secret day. It became family day. Sometimes we went to Margaret's house. Sometimes Daniel came to ours. Sometimes we all went out for lunch. And one Sunday, months after I had followed Claire, I watched her and Daniel arguing over a board game at our dining table. Emma was laughing. I was making coffee. And suddenly, I realized something. The house I had feared was hiding another life from me had actually been the doorway to one I never knew I needed. I still think Claire should have told me sooner. I still wish she had trusted me enough to let me choose how I would respond. But I've also learned something about secrets. Sometimes people don't hide things because they don't love you. Sometimes they hide things because they're terrified that the truth will make you stop loving them. That doesn't make the lie right. But sometimes understanding why someone lied is the first step toward deciding what to do with the truth. A year after I followed Claire, Daniel asked me if he could call me Dad. I wasn't expecting it. We were standing outside after dinner. He looked embarrassed. "You don't have to," he said quickly. I just thought. I stopped him. I put my hand on his shoulder. "You can call me whatever feels right." He smiled. "Okay." Then, after a pause, he said, "Thanks, Dad." I went inside a few minutes later and stood alone in the kitchen. I thought about that first Sunday. The fear. The suspicion. The jealousy. The worst stories I'd created in my own head. And I realized how close I had come to losing something beautiful simply because I was afraid of what I didn't understand. Claire walked into the kitchen. She looked at me. "What are you thinking about?" I smiled. "Nothing." She raised an eyebrow. "That's never true." I laughed. Then I pulled her into a hug. And for the first time, Sunday didn't feel like the day my wife disappeared. It felt like the day our family got a little bigger.